Yo, what's up? I'm back for the second time today, Wednesday, October 5th. I'm glad you guys like my hair. You don't really see it here because in this frame I got my head chopped off, or the top of my head chopped off. So I was talking about the OPEC meeting earlier today. Goldman, post OPEC meeting this afternoon, they raised their target to 110 to 115, and that's, they're saying, is their conservative target. That's Brent right now, which is trading around 93, 94. So they raised it up to 110, 115 in fourth quarter 2022 to first quarter 2023. Again, they said that that is a conservative forecast. And they also said, potentially skewed much higher, okay? So 110 to 115 in their conservative forecast. Guys, I gotta ask you something. I need somebody to explain this to me. I really need somebody to explain this to me. Why is it, for example, when talking about the Russia-Ukraine war, why is it if somebody, myself for example, has an opinion or a view which is counter to the mainstream media, State Department, Washington, intelligence, services, when it's contrary to that or counter to that, I'm all of a sudden, or that person is all of a sudden some kind of a Putin agent. I mean, think about it. Let's take the example, the recent example of this destruction of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline. I mean, first of all, it just seems ridiculous, on its face, that Russia would destroy vital infrastructure. I don't like, getting back to what I said, you need to have motive, you need to have capability, and you need to have opportunity. I see, Russia probably, definitely, I should say, has the capability to blow up their infrastructure. They built the damn thing, okay? And they have the opportunity. I mean, they have assets in the Baltic. But where is the motive? Where is the motive? Okay? Why would they blow up vital infrastructure? Russia has always, delivered on its contracts. Remember, it was the EU and the United States imposing sanctions. The EU, that is what caused the curtailment in natural gas flows. Germany actually never certified Nord Stream 2. It was there, it was filled with gas, charged with gas, it was ready to go. Germany never certified the project. I'm sure it was under the pressure of the United States. But anyway, question number one. Why would Russia blow up its own vital infrastructure? Question number two, or point number two. All right, and now I try to look at all the evidence. Okay, I think it's the same thing what I do with economics. I try to look at all the evidence. I'm like playing a little detective here, and I'm trying to gather evidence. I tell you, I look at the fiscal flows. I look at market psychology. Trading action. I've been a trader for many, many years. So I try to look at all the evidence, okay? First of all, it's been a long-standing goal, stated goal of the United States, that they wanted to separate Europe, cause Europe to separate from Russia in regards to Russia being a supplier of energy. They thought that, that was always stated as a strategic goal. Biden, back in February, and I'm sure everybody has seen this clip, said if Russia invades Ukraine, there will be no Nord Stream. And then one of the reporters who asked that question, this woman who asked that question said, followed up and said, well, how are you going to do that? Because Nord Stream is under the control of Germany. And Biden, halfway smiling said, I promise you, we can do that. Okay? And then just the other day, after the thing was blown up, after the pipelines were destroyed, you had Tony Blinken, Secretary of State. First he said this is a terrorist attack. It's a terrible thing, what has happened. It's outrageous. And then 2 minutes later he said, this is a great opportunity. This is a great opportunity. Because now Russia will not be able to supply gas. So for me, I'm just looking at the evidence. And if I state that, and I'm saying that's my opinion, I don't have any proof, but it seems to lean heavily in the direction of the United States having blown up that pipeline, that makes me some kind of a Putin propagandist. Sorry, I don't accept it. Okay? I don't accept it. I try to look at the evidence and put together, the facts as they are and come up with a point of view based on what I see as the evidence and the facts. Why is it that you have to be, to me, it's a cowardly stance to just blindly go in with the mainstream narrative and what the government tells you. Same thing we saw with the COVID virus. And by the way, I was vaccinated. I was walking around with masks and everything else. But a lot of things we were told back then turned out to be not true. Okay? But this is the question I'm asking everybody, and I would love to hear your comments. Why is it that if somebody has a view, an opinion, contrary to the mainstream media and Washington and the State Department and the Defense Intelligence community, why is it that suddenly, you're painted as some kind of a traitor or a propagandist for our enemies? Especially when you can show evidence to back up at least your opinion, okay? I don't see any evidence from the U.S. side other than Russia must have done it. We had former CIA director Brennan, and remember, Brennan was involved in the whole entire frame-up of Trump with, collusion with Russia. That was the whole entire thing was shown to be a bunch of BS. But we had Brennan on TV last week after, the pipelines were blown up. And he just came out and said, he was asked by the host, I don't know if he was on CNN or MSNBC, one of those shows. He's a contributor on one of those shows. Who did it? Russia did it. Not providing any details whatsoever, just saying Russia did it. And, they had a strong motive to do it. He didn't say what the motive was. He just said that Russia did it. I don't understand. Somebody explain to me why they would blow up a valuable asset that they spent billions and billions and billions and years developing and building to supply gas to Europe, which they were prepared to fulfill their contract. This doesn't make me a Putin apologist. I'm sorry. I just see the situation for what it is. And for me, it leans very strongly in the direction that the United States did it. Plus, like I said in the last video, we had what was going on in Europe recently was the outbreak of protests in Germany, protests in Scandinavia, protests in France. The people were fed up with the situation. They were fed up with the fact that they were paying exorbitant prices for energy. They were losing their jobs. Businesses were shutting down. Industries were getting squeezed. Nobody voted for this, okay? These are bureaucrats. These are these countries' politicians who decided to go in on this. And as soon as we started to get the protests. And as soon as pressure started to mount on the governments of Europe, okay, and as soon as we started to hear that Germany's position was perhaps softening with respect to the sanctions on Russia, boom, the pipelines get blown up. So somebody already had a plan saying, what can we do to quell these demonstrations, or at least make them moot, make them ineffective? In other words, the reason for the demonstration gets taken away. Okay, the demonstrations were like, we don't want to go along with these sanctions anymore. You know, we want them lifted. We want to go back to the way it was when we had access to affordable energy, which Russia is willing to provide. And as soon as that you know, kind of environment started to come about, somebody blew up the pipelines. Somebody blew up the pipelines. Now, I guess you could argue, hey, Russia blew it up because they didn't want to supply gas. But, you know, Germany wasn't even getting the gas. The pipelines were fully charged, and the gas was just sitting in the pipelines. The gas was sitting in the pipelines. Germany wasn't even getting the gas. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but if you're of the view that you must go along with the mainstream view, and anything that you are told from Washington and, you know, the mainstream media, anything you are told, you will go along with. I mean, what is that? What is that? You don't have a mind? You can't look at something objectively on your own? You can't make an assessment on your own? You just blindly, like a puppet being manipulated, go along with whatever they tell you on CNN or MSNBC or Fox News for that matter? What is that? What kind of behavior is that? This is the problem. This is the problem that I see, and it's the reason why, you know, we have foreign policy the way we have right now. Like, as long as we're told that, hey, there's some bad guy out there and we got to go get him, regardless of what the consequences. You know, we're moving very rapidly now towards a direct confrontation with Russia, which is a major nuclear power. I mean, nobody seems to be too upset about this. I am. Nobody else seems to be too upset about this. Like, it's cool. I watched the thing, I don't know if I mentioned this on my last video, but I watched the thing, a clip on YouTube of a former U.S. Army general. He's being interviewed by a guy on CNN, and he said that the United States should consider a nuclear strike on Russia. He said this very matter-of-factly, like no big deal. There wasn't even the slightest bit of pushback by the CNN host. I forget who it was. And I think a lot of people are just like, yeah, that's cool. Let's do that. I mean, it's frightening, man. It's unbelievable. I cannot believe it. But when people are you know, when they give up their right to think for themselves, and they just go along with whatever is told to them, that is a dangerous thing, okay? And that's where societies, that's where countries, that's where the entire world could get into trouble. And I just see this right now. Like, as long as people, you know, they got their little jobs, they're watching football on Sunday, you know, meanwhile, this stuff's going on, and we're not even inching closer and closer. I mean, we're there, knocking on the door to nuclear war, and everybody's like, yeah, that's cool. And Russia blew up its own pipeline. What's the reason? You don't need a reason. Just know this, that they blew up their own pipeline. I mean, explain this to me. Explain it to me. I don't get it. You know, there's even more evidence, stuff that I heard recently. Jeffrey Sachs, he's actually an economist. He's a professor at Columbia University. Maybe some of you have seen this video. I'm sure if you go on YouTube right now and if you Google Jeffrey Sachs, S-A-C-H-S, maybe I'll put the link in the description. And he was being interviewed on Bloomberg television. And you know, that guy, that funny looking guy on Bloomberg, I forget his name, he's been there forever. He looks kind of like a penguin or something like that. Never changes, had the same look for years and years and years. You probably know who I'm talking about. I think an Irish guy, I forget his name. Always wears a bow tie. And he asked Jeffrey Sachs, hey, Russia blew up the pipeline. And Jeffrey Sachs was like, wait a minute. It's the other way around. And the guy was aghast. The host was aghast, like, what? What are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, well, listen, man. You know, there were reports, and we have on radar of U.S. military helicopters in the vicinity. You know, and then he goes through the whole thing and states a lot of the things that I just stated right there. And they cut him off. Bloomberg cut him off. They said, oh, we got to end it right now. We got to end the interview. Why? Because it was contrary to what the mainstream media wants you to hear. It was contrary to that. So they cut the guy off. Check it out. I'm going to put the link in the description below. But I don't understand this, folks. I don't understand this. If you have a legitimate explanation and you say, no, it was Russia because A, B, C, D, not just it was Russia because, just because it's Russia. But this is like everything else. This is like everything else. This is very, we see this very often in economics and the stuff that I talk about. You know, when people keep repeating like, oh, you know, the Fed this or monetary policy, they can't even explain it to you. By the way, remember QT, right? That was supposed to be a disaster. Remember QT? That was the second shoe to drop. You know, we've been now, 7 months since the Fed started raising interest rates, and that was the first shoe to drop, that was going to be a disaster for everything. And yeah, the market corrected, but I told you why it corrected. It corrected because we took 10% of GDP away. But the second shoe to drop was the QT, quantitative tightening. Well, guess what? On Monday, there was a 200 billion drop in the Fed's reverse repo facility. 200 billion. That's part. Now they're getting going with QT. They're getting going with QT. 200 billion. Now, supposedly, according to all these people who were telling you that QT, and let's remember something. I was the one who said at the beginning of the year, I cannot wait until QT starts, because when it ends up being bullish, I'm going to be laughing. I'm going to be so laughing. So it dropped 200 billion in a day. All right, as securities matured, the Fed didn't roll them over. You know, so that takes that reserve liability off the Fed's books. Boom. So they should have been screaming, unprinting money. Unprinting money. You didn't hear anything. Not only that, the market, well, how much was the market up on Monday? Like 700-800 points. And then it followed that with another 800 points yesterday. That's QT. So now we're in the full mode of QT. Let's see what happens to the market. But I just want to remind you that all these people out there, they've been telling you for a long time. They're still telling you. They're out there on Twitter. They're everywhere. QT. They're going to take away the money. They're going to drain it. They're going to drain it, right? And I've explained to you that, I mean, the whole reason the Fed set up that reverse repo facility was because there was too much reserves in the system that the banks had to send it off to a separate facility that the Fed created, just so the banks would not be in non-compliance with the Fed's regulatory mandates. I mean, it's a crazy thing. The Fed sets regulatory requirements and it engages in monetary policy that pushes the banks, in jeopardy of not being in compliance. Now, what kind of crazy management is that? Do you understand what I'm saying? The Fed is the top regulator of the financial system, okay? It regulates the banks. It sets the rules and it sets the conditions under which banks can operate. Fine, so the banks, they comply with that. They have to, or you can't get a bank charter or it's taken away from you, okay? They'll shut you down. Fine, everybody understands that. But then the Fed engages in policy that pushes the banks into non-compliance with their own regulations, with the Fed's own regulations. What kind of operation is that? I'm asking you, what kind of operation is that? It's ridiculous, but yet all the voices out there, the Fed's so important, this and that. They don't know what they're doing. They do not know what they're doing. Okay, I could go on and on about this and give you many different examples. I won't do it here today. Anyway, that's it. Go to my website, Pitbull Economics. Some of you have been asking, Mike, where do I get the information on the flows? If you go to my website, I have a course called Understanding the Daily Treasury Statement. It's just $99. I teach it to you in a video course. Where to go, how to compile the data, how to analyze it, blah, blah, blah. It's all there. Bye.